function she attended, whether it was in the finest restaurant in England or in a little hole-in-the-wall in South Africa, she carried herself with grace, dignity, and style. That kind of presence wasn't a necessity for her profession, but she made it one. It had been clear to him the first time he'd met her that night 3 years ago when her father, General Neil Daniels, had introduced them at a military function here in D.C., that he and Kalina shared an intense attraction that had foretold a heated connection. What had surprised him was that she had captivated him without even trying. She hadn't made things easy for him. In fact, to his way of thinking, she deliberately made things downright difficult. He'd figured he could handle just about anything. But when he'd later run into her in Sydney, she'd almost proven him wrong. They'd been miles away from home, working together while trying to keep a deadly virus from spreading. He hadn't been ready to settle down. While he didn't consider himself a player in the same vein as some of his brothers and cousins, women had shifted in and out of his life with frequency once they saw he had no intention of putting a ring on anyone's finger. And he enjoyed traveling and seeing the world. He had a huge spread back in Denver, just waiting for the day he was ready to retire. But he didn't see that happening for many years to come. His career as an epidemiologist was important to him. But those 2 months he had been involved with Kalina, he had actually thought about settling down on his 100 acres and doing nothing but enjoying a life with her. At one point, such thoughts would have scared the hell out of him. But with Kalina, he'd accepted that they couldn't be helped. Spending time with a woman like her would make any man think about tying his life with one woman and not sowing any more wild oats. When he'd met the Daniels family, he'd known immediately that the father was controlling, and the daughter was determined not to be controlled. Kalina was a woman who liked her independence, wanted it, and she was determined to demand it, whether her father went along with it or not. In a way, Micah understood. After all, he had come from a big family, and although he didn't have any sisters, he did have 3 younger female cousins. Megan and Gemma hadn't been so bad. They'd made good decisions and stayed out of trouble while growing up. But the youngest female Westmoreland, Bailey, had been out of control while following around her younger Hellion brothers, the twins Aiden and Adrian, as well as Micah's baby brother Bane. The 4 of them had done a number of dumb things while in their teens, earning a not-so-nice reputation in Denver. That had been years ago. Now, thank God, the twins and Bailey were in college, and Bane had graduated from the Naval Academy and was pursuing his dream of becoming a SEAL. His thoughts shifted back to Kalina. She was a woman who refused to be pampered, although her father was determined to pamper her anyway. Micah could understand a man wanting to look out for his daughter, wanting to protect her, but sometimes a parent could go too far. When General Daniels had approached Micah about doing something to keep Kalina out of China, he hadn't gone along with the man. What had happened between him and Kalina had happened on its own, and hadn't been motivated by any request of her father's, although she now thought otherwise. Their affair had been one of those things that just happened. They had been attracted to each other from the first. So why she would assume he'd had ulterior motives to seek an affair was beyond him. Kalina was smart, intelligent, and beautiful. She possessed the most exquisite pair of whiskey-colored eyes, which made her honey-brown skin appear radiant. And the lights in the room seemed to highlight her shoulder-length brown hair and show its luxuriance. The overall picture she presented would make any male unashamedly aware of his sexuality. As he took another sip of his drink and glanced across the room, he thought she looked just as gorgeous as she had on their last date together, when they had returned to the States. It had been here, in this very city, where they'd met, when their life together had ended after she discovered what she thought was the truth. To this day, he doubted he would ever forgive her father for distorting the facts and setting him up the way he had. Micah sighed deeply and took the last sip of his drink, emptying his glass completely. It was time to step out of the shadows and right into the line of fire, and he hoped like hell that he survived it. Micah was here. The smile on Kalina's face froze as a shiver of awareness coursed through her, and a piercing throb hit her right between the legs. She wasn't surprised at her body's familiar reaction where he was concerned, just annoyed. The man had that sort of effect on her, and even after all this time, the wow factor hadn't diminished. It was hard to believe that it had been 2 years since she had found out the truth, that their affair in Australia had been orchestrated by her father to keep her out of Beijing. Finding out had hurt, it still did, but what Micah had done only reinforced her belief.